Have you ever been in a room full of people and you're not shy exactly? You're just quietly watching everything like you're taking mental notes for a documentary? Someone laughs a little too loudly and you clock it. Someone's smile doesn't match their eyes and you clock that too. You notice who leans in when someone speaks, who interrupts, who softens their voice around certain people, who's performing, who's protecting themselves. And while everyone else is talking, you're basically running a background process called what is actually happening here. Then later on the way home, someone goes, "You were so quiet tonight," like it's a diagnosis. And you're thinking, quiet? I was busy. I read the entire room. If you relate to that, you might be what I call a quiet observer, not a wallflower, not awkward, not broken. I just someone whose brain gathers information before it spends energy. Someone who watches first and speaks second. Someone who can be fully present without being loud. But here's the twist. The world often assumes quiet equals insecure, or uninterested, or judgmental, or socially anxious. And sometimes, sure, it can be. But a lot of the time, being a quiet observer isn't a flaw. It's a strategy. It's your nervous system choosing precision over volume. Let me show you what might be going on inside your brain when you're the person who listens more than you speak. When you're there, you're engaged, you're noticing everything, but you don't feel the need to narrate your existence out loud. Imagine your social energy like a phone battery. Some people walk into a group and their battery charges. They talk, they joke. They bounce between conversations like a pinball, and they leave more energized than they arrived. Other people walk into the same room and their battery starts quietly draining. Not because they hate people, not because they're antisocial, but because their brain is doing more processing, because they're picking up more signals. Psychologists often describe introversion and extroversion partly in terms of stimulation. In very simple terms, many introverts feel best at a lower level of stimulation and too much noise. Social input and unpredictability can tip them into overload. Extroverts often tolerate, or even crave, more stimulation before they feel too much. That's not a moral difference. That's a wiring difference. It's like some people prefer bright sunlight and some people prefer softer lighting. No one's wrong. But if you're forced into the wrong environment, you'll look like you're not thriving. Quiet observers often prefer softer lighting. And when you're wired that way, walking into a loud, fast-moving social scene isn't just fun. It's data. It's smells, tones, micro-expressions, group politics, the unspoken rules. Your brain is like, cool, cool. I will now download the entire update. There's a famous line of research on thin slicing, where psychologists Nalini Ambati and Robert Rosenthal found people can make surprisingly accurate judgments about others from very brief observations, like a few seconds of behavior. That doesn't mean we're always right, but it does mean humans are constantly sampling each other. Quiet observers tend to do this more consciously. It's like they're running a higher resolution scan. So when you're quiet, it's not necessarily that you have nothing to say. It might be that you're calibrating. You're waiting until what you say matches what you've noticed, and that can be a superpower in a world that rewards quick takes. But let's talk about the emotional side, because quiet observing isn't just a personality quirk. Sometimes it's a learned skill. Sometimes it's self-protection. If you grew up in a home where moods changed quickly, where one wrong sentence could escalate things, your brain may have learned to watch people closely to stay safe. You learned how to read the temperature of a room the way some people read the weather, by instinct. You picked up on tone shifts, facial tension, silence that wasn't peaceful but loaded. That's not being dramatic. That's pattern recognition shaped by experience. In psychology, this can overlap with hypervigilance and enhanced sensitivity to potential threat cues. Hypervigilance isn't always a panic thing. Sometimes it looks like being very perceptive. Sometimes it looks like being very quiet. Because when your brain is scanning, it doesn't want to attract attention. It wants to gather information. Quiet observers often have what I'd call low noise attention. They take in a lot, but they don't broadcast themselves while doing it. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because your quietness can be misread, and being misread can become its own loop. You know that feeling when you're quiet? and you can sense someone interpreting it. Like you can literally feel their assumptions forming in real time. Are they mad? Are they bored? Are they judging me? And suddenly you're not just observing the room anymore. You're observing how the room observes you. That's the spotlight effect. Psychologist Thomas Gilovich and colleagues described how we tend to overestimate how much other people notice and remember about us. Your brain acts like you're under a spotlight, when in reality, most people are busy starring in their own mental movie. But quiet observers, because they're sensitive to social feedback, can feel that spotlight more intensely. And then you might do the thing where you talk just to prove you're normal. You say something you don't even mean, just to fill the space. And it comes out slightly weird. And then you spend the next week replaying it like it's a deleted scene from your personal embarrassment documentary. If that's you, welcome. The Quiet Observer Club meets every night at 2 a.m. in your thoughts. But here's something important. Being quiet doesn't mean you're lacking confidence. It often means you're choosing your moments. And in many cases, that's emotional intelligence. There's this cultural myth that the most confident person in the room is the loudest. But some of the most self-assured people don't rush to speak because they don't need to prove they're there. They have internal permission to exist without constant output. Quiet observers often have a strong internal world. They think in layers, they're comfortable with pauses, they don't panic when there's silence, unless they've been taught that silence is dangerous. And yes, sometimes quietness is anxiety, sometimes it's social fear. But even then, it's not a character flaw. It's your brain trying to protect you from the pain of rejection, embarrassment, or misunderstanding. Because social pain is real pain to your nervous system. Rejection lights up some of the same brain regions involved in physical pain. Researchers have explored this overlap for years. Your brain treats exclusion as a threat because, historically, it was. So if you're quiet because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, I want you to know. That fear isn't random, it's ancient. Your brain is trying to keep you connected. And here's the philosophical part that people don't say out loud enough. Quiet observers often care deeply. That's why they watch. That's why they're careful. That's why they remember details other people forget. They're not disengaged. They're invested. They're just invested in a different way. And think about it like this. Some people show love by talking. Others show love by noticing. Quiet observers are not always the ones who say, I'm here for you. But they're often the ones who remember how you take your coffee, notice you got quieter than usual, and check in without making it a performance. They're the ones who can sit with you in silence without trying to fix you because silence is a language they already speak. Of course, there's a downside. The same sensitivity that makes you observant can make you tired. Social situations can feel like you're running too many browser tabs. You can be enjoying yourself and still feel drained because your brain is processing more than it's expressing. That's why quiet observers often need decompression time. Not because they hate people, but because their mind has been on in a specific way, tracking, interpreting, filtering. It's like being the sound engineer at a concert. You can love the music and still need quiet afterward. And sometimes quiet observers get stuck in the observer seat. They become so good at watching that they forget they're allowed to participate. Participation doesn't mean becoming loud. It means giving yourself permission to take up a little more space than you're used to let people see you, not just feel you. Because here's the sneaky thing. Staying quiet can keep you safe, but it can also keep you unseen. And being unseen, especially when you're sensitive, can start to feel lonely. So how do you know if you're a quiet observer because it's your nature or because it's your armor? One clue is how it feels in your body. If you're quiet and you feel calm, grounded, present, curious, that's likely preference. If you're quiet and you feel tight, tense jaw, shallow breathing, racing thoughts, constant self-monitoring, that might be protection. Not bad, just information. And if it's protection, you don't need to bully yourself into becoming louder. You can work on feeling safer. Because the goal isn't to change your personality, the goal is to expand your options. Quiet observers thrive when they have environments that match them. One-on-one conversations, smaller groups, spaces where people don't treat pauses like emergencies, places where depth matters more than speed. When quiet observers are in the right context, they're not quiet because they're shrinking. They're quiet because they're listening, and then they speak and it lands. It's like watching someone who barely says a word all meeting, and then near the end, they drop one sentence that rewires the entire conversation. And everyone goes, "Oh, they were thinking." That's the quiet observer at their best. So if you've spent years thinking your quietness is something to apologize for, consider this. Maybe you're not behind. Maybe you're just deep. Maybe your brain is built for patterns, nuance, subtext, things that don't always show up in fast, loud spaces. And yes, you can still grow. You can practice speaking earlier, not because you owe the room entertainment, but because you deserve to be known. You can experiment with one small contribution sooner than your brain feels fully ready, and discover that you don't have to be perfect to be present. Your voice doesn't have to be loud to be real. So here's the perspective shift I want to leave you with. Being a quiet observer is not a social deficit. It's a social style. It's a way of moving through the world with care. And in a culture that often confuses noise with value, your quiet attention is a kind of rebellion. If this felt like someone just narrated your inner life, tell me, are you a quiet observer by nature, or did life train you to become one? And what's the one thing you notice in rooms that other people seem to miss? Drop it in the comments. I read them like a quiet observer, obviously. And if you want more human, science-backed breakdowns of personality and behavior, without the robotic vibe, subscribe and stick around. Your brain is fascinating, and you deserve to understand it without feeling like you need to become someone louder to matter.